Classic cinema. Tonight's movie is 1952's Invasion U.S.A., directed by Alfred Greene. After the Second World War, Russia and the United States, who were at best shaky allies during the conflict, split over post-war reconstruction. The two countries had been adversaries since the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. An ideological clash between the Soviets and the West began and only got worse as time went on. As I just said, it got particularly intense in the days after World War II when the Berlin Wall was constructed, separating the east and west sides of the city. During the Berlin airlift, the Soviets mounted searchlights on top of the tallest buildings in East Berlin and tried to blind the pilots bringing in supplies. They stopped short of shooting the planes down, however, because the U.S. had the atomic bomb and they didn't. That didn't stop them from taking over Czechoslovakia, Poland, and the other countries they continued to occupy after the war ended. In the United States, communism became the new threat to freedom and the American way of life. Now, this was not unfounded paranoia. The Red Threat, as it was called then, was real, although not, I think, anyway, to the extent it was believed to be. If you'd like to compare it to the threat of terrorism today, go right ahead, although I think the latter threat is a bit more concrete than the Red Menace was. Of course, that's easy to say now with more than 50 years gone. See, I'm old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I don't remember a whole lot about it. I was only about 5 when it happened and really had no idea exactly what was going on. But I was astute enough to pick up on the incredible amount of tension in the air, and I'll never forget hearing the air raid sirens going off during the nightly, or so it seemed to me at the time, tests. There's something to this day about air raid sirens that awakens a deep fear in me, a fear I remember feeling as a child. It occurs to me there's something about a childhood fear you can still feel that's more powerful than any fear you can feel as an adult. Adults have, for the most part, rational fears based on what's going on in their lives, like making the bills or mortgage payments, stuff like that. Children, however, have fears that are based on fancies and imagination. I remember a recurring nightmare I used to have when I was a kid. I was heavily into Famous Monsters of Filmland and whatever other monster magazines I could get my hands on, like monster flip movies. Monster flip movies were cheaply constructed little books consisting of a series of images from films, basically black and white frame blow-ups, printed on a cheap paper and pretty much made to fall apart if you flipped them once too often, which was about 6 times. They showed a scene that was perhaps 5 seconds long, if that, and they were impossible to repair once they started losing pages. I remember 2 of them very clearly. The Creature's Captive, which was, I believe, a short shot of the creature from the Black Lagoon picking up Julia Adams, and one from 1935's Werewolf of London, showing Henry Hull in full werewolf regalia jumping a bobby on a foggy London night. That one completely freaked me out. I was talking about a nightmare I used to have, wasn't I? Okay. Well, I told you that to tell you this. I was heavily into the classic Universal monsters like Frankenstein, the Mummy, Dracula, and the Creature, all of those. I always had the feeling that Dracula was kind of like their leader for some reason. I don't know why, but I did. Maybe it was because out of all of them, he had the best language skills. Anyway, I used to sleep on the upper level of a bunk bed, and I figured that once the lights were off, all of them would come out of the closet looking for little kids to kidnap and murder, so if I just laid real still and pretended to be asleep, they'd walk up, take a look, and go on about their business. Maybe kidnapping and murdering the jerk that lived on the block or something. And I had to lie absolutely still, because since I was on the top bunk, I was pretty much at their eye level, and any movement would give me away. Once the monsters did their nightly check, I'd fall asleep and have this weird dream. I dreamt that my brother and Mike and I were helping my mom make a cake in the kitchen, and she needed some flour, so I got sent down to the basement to get it. While I was down there, a witch came pulling up on a broom, grabbed me, and took off with me. Between then and the end of the dream, I ran into and was chased by every single monster I'd ever seen in a movie or magazine. Frankenstein chased me through a Bavarian village. The Wolfman chased me through the woods. The Creature chased me through a swamp, which meant I couldn't run fast because I kept getting bogged down in the muck. The Invisible Man chased after me, unwrapping his head as he laughed maniacally. Dracula would rise out of his coffin and come after me. And it always ended up with me running through the storage area in the attic being chased by an enraged King Kong. The really odd thing about this is that I always experienced it from the point of view of a camera. I would see the action played out as if I were watching a movie. Now, applying adult logic to this dream pretty much destroys the whole thing, especially the end of it. The storage areas in the attic of the house I grew up in were under the eaves, which meant that the ceiling of the back room slanted at about a 30-degree angle and was only about 4 feet high at its highest point, in addition to being packed wall to wall with trunks, old cots, sleeping bags, and assorted junk that you had to crawl over at the best of times. So how the hell I could have been chased through a 20-foot long by 4-foot high space by a 50-foot gorilla doesn't really come together. Now, try to explain that to a 6-year-old kid with a huge imagination that's populated by almost nothing but monsters. I sometimes imagine me trying to explain this to myself as a kid, and I always see the kid that I was looking up at the adult I am, shaking his head and saying, "You don't get it. If there are monsters in the world, anything is possible." That's pretty much how someone who grew up during the Red Scare could explain it to someone today. It's pretty much impossible to understand how real a threat that seemed at the time. This is not to excuse the shameful persecution that many honest Americans had to endure. There's no fear that can't be exploited by our dear government in order to gain more power over its citizens, and you can draw direct parallels to what happened then and what's happening today. But the common sense of the population eventually saw through the hysteria, and sensible heads prevailed. Unfortunately, the price paid by the country was steep and is still felt today. Of course, there's also no fear that the entertainment business can't exploit either, and tonight's movie is an excellent example of this. I've heard all the excuses that this movie was made as a wake-up call to America to warn the populace out of its complacency, to warn them that the price of freedom is constant vigilance, or that a strong America is a safe America, and while those arguments are true, the fact is that this film was made to make money. And boy, did it ever. The budget for this film was about $127,000, which was incredibly low, even back then. I'd say roughly 30% of it is made up of stock footage, which is an even heavier ratio than we all enjoyed watching in Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. Now, I don't mind the use of stock footage that much. It helps stretch an already bursting at the seams budget and adds a little bit of production value to films otherwise devoid of it. However, when it's used as padding, it begins to try my patience. For instance, in this film, there are several nuclear strikes, and every single one of them is the same shot of the same A-bomb going off from the same angle. The invasion scenes feature American planes dropping American soldiers, but that's cleverly explained away by pointing out that the enemy is using our planes and wearing American uniforms. Apparently, they're also using American battleships and aircraft carriers. Conveniently, the enemy is never named. They're only ever referred to in this film as them. Since them speak with Russian accents and use revolutionary jargon exclusively associated with communism, it kind of narrows down just exactly who them could be. Just in case there's any lingering doubt, around the end of the movie, a paragon of clean American womanhood is set upon by a loutish, vodka-swilling enemy soldier. And we all know who swills vodka, don't we? Once again, getting back to the point, this movie cost $127,000 to make and returned $1,200,000 in 1953 bucks. I have no doubt whatsoever that this movie scared the hell out of everyone who saw it when it was first released. I like a scary movie probably more than the next guy, but I draw the line at movies like this. Scary movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre I enjoy because I can deal with the thought of being chased through a tangle of woods by a maniac with a roaring chainsaw, because I can do something about that. I can run. I can run screaming. I can run serpentine, although what good that will do, I can't imagine. But I can escape. Outrunning an explosion, no matter how many times you've seen Rambo First Blood Part 2, is impossible. I recently saw a movie called Miracle Mile, wherein a guy picks up a public phone that's ringing and receives a misdialed call from a soldier in a missile silo and finds out the nuclear missiles are going to hit LA in 50 minutes. The rest of the movie takes place in real time, and even though you hope like crazy these people will somehow escape, you know there's no chance of it happening. The great things about horror films is that you know no matter how badly you screw up in real life, odds are you'll never get into a predicament like that. You have some amount of control. Conversely, if you look up in the sky and see the contrail of a missile heading your way, The only thing he can really do is grab the first attractive female that passes by, point at the sky, and let nature take its course. I may be somewhat overstating the case here, since when you get right down to it, this is a rotten movie. Dan O'Herlihy was born on May 1st, 1919 in Wexford, Ireland. He appeared in 148 movies and television series in his career. He earned a degree in architecture at the National University of Ireland, and after that began acting on stage at Dublin's Abbey Theatre. Director Carol Reed spotted him there and cast him in 1947's Odd Man Out. He had an unmistakable stentorian voice that enabled me to recognize him instantly under the extensive makeup he wore as Grigg in 1984's The Last Starfighter, one of my favorite movies, in addition to appearing as the Old Man, the head of Omni Consumer Products in 1987's RoboCop. His last role was Joseph P. Kennedy in the TV movie The Rat Pack. Dan O'Herlihy died of natural causes on February 17, 2005 in Malibu, California. Peggy Castle was born on December 22, 1927 in Appalachia, Virginia. In one of those quirks of fate that become legend in Hollywood, she was actually discovered by a talent scout while eating a lunch in a Hollywood restaurant, and then pretty much typecast as the other woman in a majority of B films she appeared in, eventually landing a role playing Lily Merrill in the 1950s TV western Lawman. She played the role for 4 years and retired from show business afterwards, developing an alcohol problem and dying from cirrhosis of the liver on August 11, 1973, in Hollywood, California. Gerald Moore was born on June 11, 1914 in New York City. Another B-movie regular, he was raised by his mother and grandfather after his father died when Moore was 5 years old. As his grandfather was a psychiatrist who was an associate of Sigmund Freud, Moore became a firm believer in Freudian psychology. He was taught to ride and play the piano, attending the Dwight Preparatory School in New York. His excellent voice led him to work in radio with Orson Welles at the Mercury Theater, which led to his Broadway premiere in a minor gangster role in a production of The Petrified Forest. His first movie was as the heavy in the 1941 serial Jungle Girl, but he continued to work in radio, appearing in a number of suspense shows such as The Adventures of Philip Marlowe and The Whistler. He went on to appear in 145 movies and TV shows over the course of his career, his last film role being that of Tom Bronca in 1968's Funny Girl with Barbra Streisand. He died of a heart attack on November 9, 1968 in Stockholm, Sweden. Tom Kennedy was born on July 15, 1885 in New York City. He plays the role of Tim the bartender in this film and will be familiar to fans of the Three Stooges, as he appeared in a number of their shorts in addition to appearing in 321 movies and TV shows during his long career, usually in uncredited roles. He started out as a boxer and eventually gravitated into movies, almost exclusively playing a working-class guy, a mug, or a gangster of some sort. He died on October 6, 1965 in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles, California, of bone cancer. This film should not be confused with 1985's Invasion U.S.A., which was directed by Joseph Zito and starred Chuck Norris, although that movie richly deserves a spot on this show. I have it in my DVD library right next to my copy of tonight's movie, and it's even funnier. A bunch of communists invade the United States via Florida and make terrorist strikes all over the state, since they don't seem to have the same budget the invaders in tonight's movie had. The film opens with a boatload of Cuban refugees floating out in the middle of the ocean and being rescued by a Coast Guard vessel. The crew of the boat comes up next to them, welcomes them to America, and then opens fire on the helpless people on the boat with automatic weapons, slaughtering all the old men, women, and children aboard. It turns out these are the bad guys. And just to prove how bad they really are, they attack suburban homes during Christmas time, blowing them up with Laws rockets. These guys are so incredibly evil, it's actually funny in a sick way. They take the United States completely flat-footed, and it's up to Chuck Norris and an incredibly annoying female reporter who just happens to be everywhere these guys attack to witness what's going on. Norris doesn't do anything until a terrorist attack his Everglades abode and injures his pet armadillo. But he makes up for his lag in action by killing hundreds of terrorists by somehow figuring out exactly where and when they're going to attack next. My favorite parts in the movie are when the terrorists attempt to blow up a church and a school bus full of children, and Norris comes to the rescue just in time. Why they're blowing up school buses and churches is never really explained, but they're evil, so, go figure. After watching tonight's movie, you might want to track down a copy of the 1985 version and enjoy that as well. It's good for a laugh, and let's face it, everyone enjoys seeing terrorists get blown away. especially when Norris manages to score grenade launchers that fire 2 grenades in rapid succession without reloading. The movie also stars the excellent Richard Lynch as the leader of the terrorists, an actor who should be familiar to any fan of recent low-budget films. His scarred face, which pretty much typecast him as a sadistic bad guy, came from a time when, in 1967, he dropped some bad acid and set himself on fire behind the Guggenheim Museum. He survived the incident and became a strong opponent of drug use. Invasion USA is not a very good movie, but it's very interesting as a curio of the Cold War. If you find the subject interesting, there's a wealth of films you can buy or rent that deal with the Red Scare, such as 1949's The Red Menace, 1952's The Atomic City, and Big Jim McClane, starring John Wayne, and various documentaries such as Duck and Cover and The Atomic Cafe. Some of these films are better than others, but for the most part, they're fascinating looks into the psyches of 50s America. With any luck, we'll be able to get our hands on 1961's Rocket Attack USA, which is even worse than this one. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Invasion USA, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.